Hi. I hear Dr. Hendricks is still talking, so after he's finished, I get to say hi and Kay, and I get to welcome you here today. And today we're going to hear the story. Is there a problem? Today we're going to hear the story of Mrs. Takeshita. She started out in Japan and ended up here. And I also get to tell you that we have, it's not that easy to find the stories of Japanese Americans, because they tend to be left out of many sources, and some of the sources we always use to do historical research. So we relied on oral history and other unusual sources to find the story. And we wanted to make sure we knew the story so that we could, even though we have Mrs. Takeshita here to tell the story, we wanted to let her know what we thought were the important things that we'd like her to cover today. So we gave her a little help. We have Jennifer Jung here today, who is going to tell you the story of Mrs. Takeshita, and we're lucky to have her. This is her second year at the cemetery tour, and she was so good last year. We're very happy to get her back. And we also, as a special treat, have Councilwoman Gerrie Schipske here, who's also going to contribute to the storytelling. She's making a special appearance as Cora Morgan. As you may know, she's running for mayor, so you should know her, some of her qualifications. She's a registered nurse practitioner, she's an attorney, she's an adjunct faculty member at Cal State Long Beach. She's an advocate for women, the author of several history books about Long Beach, and in case you're interested, they can all be found at our merchandise stand in the other cemetery. And as I said, she's running for mayor and trying to keep the city on the right track. First, however, let me introduce to you Mrs. Takeshita.
Ohayou gozaimasu. Hello and welcome. My name is Yaye Kurayama Takeshita. In 1913, when I was 18 years old, my parents decided I would become a picture bride and sent me off to America to join my new husband, a man who I had only seen in a photograph. I do not understand why my parents chose me and not one of my sisters to go. It was not as if I was an old maid, and I was not some simple girl from the countryside or a fishing village. I was a city girl from Tokyo. I did not want to go, but maybe it would have been easier had I known why I had to go, but I was not even allowed to ask. I believe my parents thought I would become very rich in America and send lots of money home. I sent many letters, but never any money. There was not enough to spare. My husband's name was Masamoto Takeshita. He was from the samurai class, and he was also a Christian, like my family was. Mas was 12 years older than me. That was the unfortunate reality for many picture brides. We arrived in America and discovered our husbands were 10 or more years older than in the photograph they sent us. Many were also not as successful as we were told. I was fortunate that my husband was not only educated, but he had a trade as a tailor. Others were not so lucky. We moved from Oakland to Salinas, where he opened his own tailoring shop, and we served the Japanese farming community there. My husband was very gregarious and civic-minded, which was the opposite of me. In addition to tailoring, he was also a news correspondent and sales representative for the San Francisco News. That was the Japanese newspaper for the Bay Area. And when we joined the Japanese American Presbyterian Church, he quickly became a respected leader. Of course, that doesn't mean he was perfect. Mas loved his liquor. I was concerned about it at first, but thankfully He strongly believed in the samurai code of honor, which compelled him to give up liquor when our first child, Toshi, was born in 1915. Toshi was my only daughter. We had 5 more children after her, all boys. We did have a 7th, but he did not survive. We, of course, made sure our children all spoke English, and we also sent them to Japanese school so they could learn the language and the culture. They all knew what we expected from them. We wanted them to be responsible and educated citizens and never to bring shame on the family. My duty was to keep the house, cooking, cleaning, and taking care of the children. With 6 children to raise, I was quite busy, but I did find time to learn to bake American style. My specialty was lemon meringue pie. We built a good life in Salinas. We were able to buy a house in our son's name. That helped us get around the Alien Land Act of 1913. And we even had an Oldsmobile and went for lovely drives on Sundays after church. Of course, when the Great Depression came, life became difficult. My husband was working less because fewer and fewer farmers could afford a tailor. So to help us out, my daughter Toshi opened a beauty salon downtown. She was so very talented. She had mixed clientele, not just Japanese. And when my oldest son, Masao, graduated from UC Berkeley, he moved back home and opened an optometry right next to Toshi's beauty salon. Together, their incomes helped us keep our house during those difficult years. One Sunday afternoon, while we were on our usual after-church drive, we heard the news about the bombing of Pearl Harbor over the radio. It was December 7th, 1941. We decided it was best to quickly drive home before our Japanese faces could be seen. In April of 1942, we were all taken to the Salinas rodeo grounds and housed in temporary barracks. A few months later, we were put on trains during the night and taken to an unknown location. On the 4th of July, 1942, we arrived at the post and internment camp on the Colorado River Indian Reservation in Arizona. It was 126 degrees outside, and not much better at night. Our family of 8 was given one room to share in a barrack made of thin wood and tar paper, and we were surrounded by armed soldiers and fences and guard towers. I did my best to make that place livable. Mas was very busy mending people's clothing. Since we could only bring so much with us, we had to make everything last. He was also very busy with the camp government and gave sewing lessons. My son Masao was the only optometrist for the camp. That meant one optometrist for about 10,000 people. He only charged a little over cost because he knew how financially and emotionally stressed everyone was. And he was paid $19 a month. Our family did not leave the camp at the same time, which was a little unusual. Through my husband's church contacts, my daughter Toshi got a job as a beautician in Detroit, and we followed her there a little while later. My younger sons all joined the army. They wanted to prove their loyalty and well, they wanted to get out of that horrible camp. My son Masao also wanted to join, but he was so skinny from the heat that the army refused. So he decided to stay behind in the camp to help the people there, and he stayed almost until the camp closed. My younger sons were all war heroes, and my son Shigeo even earned the Purple Heart. But he was so wounded that they thought he wasn't going to make it, and they brought us all to Washington, D.C. to say our goodbyes. Although he had a lot of metal in his body, he did survive, and he lived to be 89. He became a dental assistant, and he married this wonderfully funny and lively woman named Cookie. She was a leader at the Buddhist temple in San Leandro, so he decided to convert, and he also became active in the temple as well. My son Shiro fought in Italy, France, Austria, and Germany. It was a miracle that he was never wounded. They were chasing a German battalion when they liberated Dachau. Right away, he saw the similarities between that camp and the post and internment camp. The rows of desolate barracks, the fences, the guard towers, and people imprisoned unjustly as we were. I remember he told me he couldn't believe the evil directed at the Jewish people. He remembered seeing so many dead bodies everywhere and that the living looked like walking skeletons. After the war, my daughter Toshi and my husband and I all moved to Chicago to be with our sons Saburo and Goro. It was there that my daughter met her husband, George Nishimoto. He was an important leader and minister, and he helped open the Ellis Community Center to help the Japanese who were moving to Chicago after the internment. My son Saburo was conscripted into military intelligence, but the war ended before he finished his training. He began working at Marshall Field's department stores, but I really wanted him to be a professional like his older brother. So I convinced him to go to college, and he also became an optometrist. In 1955, my husband slipped on the concrete stairs to our basement and hit his head, and he died a while later. After he passed away, I kept house for my bachelor son, Goro, who was working as a mechanic at a Ford dealership. After my son Masao left the internment camp, he began to look for a new place to start over. It was still too hostile for Japanese Americans in Salinas, and since we lost our house and our Oldsmobile, there really wasn't anything to go back to. That's when he heard about Long Beach, and he found a welcoming community here. He opened an optometry in a building on Atlantic between St. Mary's and Memorial Hospitals. And I will never forget that building because I remember it looked like a castle. Later, he opened his own office and with a house in the back on the same block on Atlantic and 19th Streets. And my son Saburo also moved to Long Beach and joined Masao's practice. My son Masao was also very civic-minded and a natural leader like his father. He worked with Frank Ishii and many others to bring back the Japanese American Citizens League and was also elected to be their president. He also worked with people like Frank Morooka and Kimi Sugiyama to open the Japanese Cultural Center on Seabright Avenue and to get Grace Presbyterian Church back. It was at church where he met his wife Aiko Sugiyama, whose parents are also buried here. In 1968, my children decided to move me from Chicago to Long Beach. They told me that the warmer weather was better for my old bones, and I would also have grandchildren around me to enjoy. I passed away in 1974. Although I died still feeling much shame from being a picture bride and from being interred in my heart, I am very happy to be able to leave behind children and grandchildren that I could be proud of. Thank you.
Well, I'm Cora Morgan, and when I hear Yaye talk about the experiences that she faced, I have to remember the experiences of another very, very important person that she's mentioned, and that's Kimi Sugiyama. I want to tell you just quickly who I am. In Long Beach, I helped fight for women's rights, and if you remember in 1911, we were able to get the right to vote. We still have to vote, early and often. But you might best remember me for suing the city of Long Beach because unfortunately they hired me to be a stenographer and they failed to pay me the $2 a day they owed me for 288 days. But I did get my revenge in court. But enough about me. I really want to talk about Kimi Sugiyama. This wonderful woman was born in Japan, and she came here at the age of 3. Her parents lived in Pasadena, and while she was in Pasadena, at the age of 8, she was able to ride on the Rose Parade float, representing the Japanese American Association. It was also in Pasadena that she met her future husband, Shigetoshi, who was a teacher of Japanese. And her brothers actually arranged for her to meet him. And her father had discouraged her greatly from going to college, but she did. And she wanted to be a lawyer. Unfortunately, he made her quit at age 20 because he said if she did not quit, she would not find a man. She did find a man, and they moved from Pasadena to the Signal Hill area to open up a Japanese teaching course. It was on 2/3 of an acre. Apparently it was located in one of the most richest areas of oil, but they didn't know that at the time. They had 115 students, and they were joined by 4 other teachers. And they taught individuals how to speak Japanese as well as English. It's because of Kimi's skills that she was able to work with the Japanese farmers who had settled in the area. The Japanese farmers farmed the area. They were able to grow things like cucumbers that were very valued. And they were able to up the prices of those cucumbers because they could put white canvas on there. And that's very important because in 1921, an incredible thing happened just right over here, and oil was struck. And so the property on which the school was became extremely valuable. And the Japanese farmers who were here were soon displaced, or if they remained, their crops were ruined by the oil that spewed out from the ground. And for instance, on the white canvas, they were not able to clean the canvas sufficiently, so it really hurt their market for cucumbers, which they had been selling to the East Coast. Kimi, because she could speak English fluently, worked with these farmers, advocated for the farmers, and went individually to the oil operators to get compensation for some of the farmers. She would work at night, come home, make notes on her typewriter. She would take them back, and she would argue on behalf of these farmers so that they could get some compensation. Some of the oil operators were very cooperative and very apologetic and paid some compensation. Others said no. She and her husband moved from the area, and they decided to buy a store in 1929. And they operated that store until the 1933 earthquake, at which time her husband was injured when bricks fell from the building and hit his chest. He never quite recovered from that. Sadly, just as Yaye said, what happened in this area because of World War II, she and her family were interred in Jerome, Arkansas. First, they were taken to Santa Anita, though, the racetrack, and the conditions there were horrible. They were placed in the areas where the horse stalls were until they could be then bused to Jerome, Arkansas. Upon their return after the war, they came back here. Her husband actually had passed, and she was very, very active in the community for many years. Yaye mentions that she was instrumental with her husband in forming the Grace Presbyterian Church, and they continue to honor her yearly by giving the Kimi Sugiyama Award for someone who has reached out to the community and, in their words, has done God's work. She passed away not too long ago, but she is remembered as someone who fought for the people that she loved, someone who really worked to be able to represent them. She really wanted to be a lawyer. She would have loved to finish law school, but in many ways she was the best lawyer that the Japanese had in this area. And so I'm grateful, as someone who's fought on behalf of women's rights, to bring you her story. She's just a wonderful woman. Thank you so much for coming today.
All right, if you go to the 10 o'clock tour, follow me.